In 1941, the world's most powerful nations were at war, except one. The United States of America had, up to that point, stayed on the sidelines, but that didn't mean they were neutral. They saw the atrocities being committed and were increasingly willing to intervene, albeit not directly. Instead, they would try something new that would change the world of energy and foreign policy forever. They would place an oil embargo on Japan. You see, by World War II, war had become mechanized. Modern armies were equipped with tanks, fighter planes, and battleships. And these machines, well, they needed oil. At the time, the US was the #1 supplier of this black gold. And without US imports, Japan would lose 90% of what they needed, effectively ending their capacity to wage war. Japan, in response, would attack Pearl Harbor, dragging the US into the conflict. But from that point onwards, oil, gas, fossil fuels, they were not just a commodity or a source of energy, they had become a tool for international coercion. Simply put, if you could control the supply of oil, you could control the world. And more than 80 years later, the world seems to be playing the exact same game.
Conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions on Russia have led to another surge in the cost of oil and gas.
Donald Trump says he plans to tap Venezuela's vast oil reserves.
By choking off oil in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has exposed the vulnerability of the Gulf states and the global economy.
But a new era of clean energy is emerging. And as global superpowers fight to preserve their dominance as petro-states, they may be unknowingly dismantling the very fossil fuel system that keeps them in power. You are watching Carbon Anonymous, a climate change YouTube channel dedicated to providing accessible and accurate climate information. And in this video, we're going to talk about how war is pushing the world towards clean energy. While World War II was the first time fossil fuels were used as leverage, it certainly wasn't the last. By the 1970s, things had changed. US oil production had not kept pace with the insatiable demand of their own consumers, let alone the world. Luckily, new oil reserves in the Middle East increasingly started to fill that gap. And slowly, Western countries became dependent on that imported oil, almost as if they'd forgotten about the lessons of World War II. In 1973, that dependency was made bare. Middle Eastern countries, outraged by Western support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War, decided to use their so-called oil weapon. Yet another oil embargo. This time, however, it wasn't meant to starve armies, it was meant to starve the global economy. And so started the oil crisis of the 1970s. Within months, gas prices would soar by more than 300%. But that was if you could even find it, as gas shortages proliferated across the world. And unfortunately, since energy is in many ways the base of an economy, these impacts weren't just limited to commuters. Inflation rose to 10% across the US, and economic growth slowed to a standstill. Something had to be done. To help alleviate oil shortages, the US for the first time ever would implement fuel efficiency standards. They also reduced the speed limits of highways down to 55 miles an hour. Hell, they even introduced right on red to reduce the number of cars that were idling and therefore wasting their precious gas. Other countries who were similarly affected followed suit. France in particular built the highest percentage of nuclear power plants in the world in an attempt to reduce their dependency on imported fossil fuels. Now, these measures, while they helped, did not solve the issue. In fact, 50 years later, it seems like we've returned to the exact same problems. It is hard not to draw parallels of our current global affairs with those of the past. The world is increasingly at war, and fossil fuels are once again stuck in the middle. Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 caused huge spikes in the cost of energy, especially in Europe. And of course, more recently, the US invasion of Iran has effectively cut off access to 20% of the world's oil and 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. And much like the past, these events are not only causing pains at the gas station, but are once again ushering in inflation and economic stagnation. Well, I argue that through the fog of war, a solution is starting to emerge, and that is clean energy. Now, I'm sure that by this point you have noticed the growing amount of EVs on the road and solar panels going on roofs. This growth is largely because of cost, because at this point, no ifs, ands, or buts, renewables are now the cheapest source of electricity in the world, and electric vehicles, well, they're also starting to show their key advantages. But war is building upon this growth in two key ways. The first reason is quite obvious. Expensive fossil fuels push people to more affordable alternatives. In a similar way to how gas-guzzling muscle cars died in the oil crisis of the 1970s, so too will high gas prices force consumers to other, cheaper options. And unfortunately for the dino fuels, it looks like when consumers go green, they don't go back. The second, and I argue more interesting reason as to why war is promoting clean energy is national security. And there is a statistic that I find particularly telling in this regard. Approximately 84% of the world's population lives in net oil importing countries, because that's the crappy thing about fossil fuels. Not everybody has them. And these importing countries are more or less at the mercy of the international market. Take Pakistan, for example. In 2024, their economy was reeling from the energy shocks created by the Ukraine war. Their consumers took action into their own hands, and in just 2 years, they imported 35 gigawatts worth of solar panels. Now, if that number means nothing to you, this is more solar capacity than France has installed in their entire history. In 2 years, they were able to achieve this feat. This example, by the way, is not the only one. China, the world's largest oil importer, is now so ahead in clean energy that they're being referred to as the world's first electrostate. Europe, trying to become independent of Russian natural gas, is building out clean energy faster than ever. Even Africa, once seen as an untapped market for fossil fuels, is importing record-breaking amounts of clean energy. The trend is clear. Oil-dependent countries are sick of the status quo and are seeking energy independence. Because that is the advantage of clean energy that people don't often think about. The sun and wind, while not always shining or blowing, is at least free and available to everyone, everywhere. As long as you have the technology to harness it, you can achieve energy independence and insulate yourself from the chaos of fossil fuels and current global affairs. But to be as fair as possible, this is not to say that clean energy is devoid of these issues. China, as the world's first electrostate, is so far ahead of the game, they are basically the whole game. They manufacture 80% of the world's solar panels, 70% of the world's EV batteries, and basically have a stranglehold over critical mineral refinement. However, China's dominance is a known issue, and many countries, particularly in the West, are realizing how important it is to compete in this clean energy space. Secondly, another key distinction is that clean energy, unlike fossil fuels, is not a commodity you burn, but a technology that you install. And what I mean by that is the gas you put into your car, well, that would last you about a week. The solar panels you install on your roof, well, those will last 25 years. So even if there are supply chain disruptions, for fossil fuels, the impact is immediate and acute. But for clean energy, if it even happens at all, it will likely be minor. But with those nuances addressed, the main takeaway should still be the same. While fossil fuels have provided the energy the world needed, they have done so in an unequal, dirty, and often unreliable manner. And although for the last 80 years, controlling oil in many ways did mean you could control the world, a new game is in town that is cleaner, cheaper, and more reliable. And if the fossil fuel economies of yesterday continue to act as if nothing has changed, they may only speed up their decline. But that is the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. It will help me achieve my goal of spreading accurate and accessible climate change information. I did try something new this time, a more formal, serious essay, so let me know if you liked it. But with that being said, you've been watching Carbon Anonymous, and thank you for stopping by.